All right, welcome to today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in today. David Bradshaw is back with us. He is the founder of Awaken the Dawn, and this is part 2 with him. If you're new to the podcast, the Presence Pioneers podcast exists to equip presence-centered Christian communities to worship and pray night and day. So this is for worshipers, intercessors, lovers of Jesus, and leaders that are connected to houses of prayer, burn communities, praying churches and groups. This is for you to help you. And if it's helping you, then share it with your community because it will be encouraging to them. And our desire is to ultimately just strengthen the prayer movement. So any way that you can like or comment or review or share these episodes will help just get the word out and see Jesus glorified, which is what we all desire. So be sure to subscribe if you're not subscribed, and stay connected with us on our website at presencepioneers.org, where we have all of our previous episodes as well. All right, David, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
For sure. So on the last episode, you got to share some of the origins of Awaken the Dawn and the gathering that led up to this gathering in 2017 on the National Mall with over 50 tents, thousands of worship leaders, and thousands of worshipers that were there together. We shared about, just the years that led up to that in hiddenness, basically in Fredericksburg, Virginia, a small community of prayer, being consistent day in and day out with the Lord. If you guys did not check out that last episode, be sure to catch part 1 with David. It was great. So let's pick up where we left off before. 2017, there was this amazing gathering on the National Mall that launched Awaken the Dawn, which has now become its own movement, its own ministry that's taking off. So where's Awaken the Dawn now? Kind of what's happened over the last few years?
Yeah, well, I think in our hearts, we're really operating from this sense of there's not a human remedy right now for where America is, and the reality of the presence of God is the greatest change agent, and this need to even disciple America. And I know that's what Presence Pioneers and Burn 24/7 and all these movements is really our heart, is to disciple America in hosting the presence of God and in, really in this culture of worship and prayer. And so, so we left the National Mall in 17, and then the Lord just really spoke to us. Again, it's a long story, but to go to 50 state capitals and university campuses. So the next year there were tents at all 50 state capitals and about 100 universities. And then last year it was anyone, anywhere. So it was just this idea of the arc of God's presence going out in public into the center of our cities. And I think that's one of the dreams that God's been stirring in our hearts. And I know of many communities around the nation, is this synergy between worship and music and evangelism, really gospel proclamation, and how these things converge together. I was in California with a dear friend of mine, Brian Brent, who leads the Circuit Riders, and I'm at his house, and his wife had just been healed at the Send in 2018 from about 36 years of chronic Lyme's disease, so almost bedridden the majority of the time. And anyway, so we're just kind of enjoying this moment of this healing, and she shares they had 2 life words. One was stadiums, and the other was tents. And as we're talking, the dream that was in their heart was for these, like really what you saw with Billy Graham, this movement of healing, of love, of the gospel through tents that's engaging cities and campuses in public. And what we've been doing, obviously, was day and night worship and prayer around the clock. And what we realized in that moment is that they're the same thing, that these are the same tents, and that God wanted to converge all that together. And I told Brian in that moment, I'm like, man, I believe the tents are like a silver bullet that God has given us. And I wrote that down in my notes, and I was preaching at a session a couple hour maybe-ish later, and had my notes out, it says tents are a silver bullet. And this lady walks up to me. I never met her before at the time. And she pulls a silver bullet out of her pocket, like an actual silver bullet.
Wow.
And she goes, I don't know why, but the Lord told me to give you a silver bullet. And I'm like freaking out because I just said that and written that down. And that kind of started a journey, a dream of what if, as the stadiums go into cities like the Send, what if there was this tent city that filled that same region for days, around the clock, with worship and music and prayer, and that it converts. So by the time you get into a stadium, you're riding a wave of God's presence in a city. And this dream of all this converging together began to stir in our hearts. And so that kind of led us to this moment in Kansas City, in October 2020, where we're going to, Lord willing, go to the Harry Truman's farm, which is currently owned by the International House of Prayer, and set up a tent city there and call musicians from around the nation and sing and pray day and night, in tents on that farm, and then march to the stadium with the Send that's going to Arrowhead Stadium. It's a wild story. And so that's coming up in 2020. And what we really sensed was that our whole movement was taking a bit of a shift, in that we weren't just going to do the one moment where everybody prays, but God just dropped this dream in our hearts of 100 days, starting in June 20th, going all the way through the end of September, where there are tents for 100 days straight across the nation. I'm just imagining what it'll be like to wake up every day and go, where are the tents today? And it's like this procession really across America, that anyone can host a tent. You can sign up. We're about to roll the official sign up form out in just guess about 2 weeks, and you can sign up to host a tent in your city and campus, and we'll just track it. We'll use social media, but I think an amazing story is going to begin to emerge of worship and music and prayer at the center of our cities. And I think it's going to be a transformative deal. And so that's 2020 for us. It's going to be a pretty amazing. Again, it's kind of like we're finding ourselves in a place of doing something that's never been done. People kind of laugh because I would always say that, like, this is unprecedented. It's kind of like, well, shoot, it actually kind of is. This hasn't happened before. So, but I just think the Lord's hands on it. And so we just want to see America transformed around the presence and the beauty of who Jesus is as a person. And so that's the hope and the dream in all this.
Amazing. So 2018, 2019, the tents were all set up at the same time.
Yeah.
For the same period of time, but in all different places. And now 2020, you're saying the tents are going to be spread out, not only geographically, but over the course of a calendar, where there's going to be different tents set up at all different times, so that at any given moment, there's one or more tents set up somewhere in America doing nonstop worship and prayer.
100 days straight, 24/7 worship in public. I just believe it's going to be an open heaven over our nation. And also that the family and the communities are going to discover one another even at the next level, because, if there was a tent set up an hour's drive from me, it wouldn't be that hard, to be able to connect with one another and to begin to, even via social media and other ways, begin to track and connect and see what the Lord is doing, and just bring that interconnectedness to these presence-centered communities across the nation and on campuses. And I really believe it's going to be a transformative moment for our nation. And so we're excited. It's a lot of work, so pray for us. But again, everybody can host their own tents. So a lot of people ask the question, they're like, where are you taking the tents? We have a big tent we're buying, and we'll go to some cities. But if you want to host a tent in your city, what we'll do is just resource you and help you do it. So you can sign up, and we'll send you resources. We're raising up right now leaders in states and regions to help resource the communities and even help send resources to the people that are hosting tents. So this, our heart's desire, is just to be a resource and really throw gasoline on the fire of what God's already doing in cities and campuses. And so we're excited just to be able to serve the broader move of God that's really already transpiring across the nation.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think most people that are tracking the podcast might track with me, but I'm actually helping with some of that now with Awaken the Dawn, where I'm stepping into
we're super excited about that.
A role on the team, helping with the network of leaders behind the scenes that's really sort of been undergirding all these initiatives and tents, those that are hosting the tents and the leaders that are connecting together behind the scenes and all that kind of thing. And so,
and that's so critical too, because as important as the events are, the bigger narrative here is that we want to build that interconnectedness and serve praying communities, worshiping, presence-centered communities across the nation. And this leadership network I think it's going to start to, it's decentralized. It's not like, anybody has to leave an organization to be a part of this.
Right.
But man, but just to build that interconnectedness and discipleship resources and create those relational connections that serve the broader, that's how God's purposes come, right? It's like in the midst of Holy Spirit empowered friendship. So
yeah,
I'm so excited about this next phase.
It's going to be amazing. And
Yeah.
we'll put all in the show notes. We'll include all the links so people can go and connect with ATD and set up tents and all that. I'm remembering around the time 2017 or maybe before that, as this stuff was stirring up, I remember there was a word about from tents to stadiums. And then I remember I felt, and I don't think I heard this from someone else. I think I got this from the Holy Spirit. I don't want to claim it if I heard it and then remembered it later, but from tents to stadiums and stadiums to the nations. And it's so cool how now that the Lord he's set up, these tents are happening. And now there's going to be stadium gatherings all over America in 2020. The Send is happening, and the Send's all about sending people to the nations.
Yeah.
And so God's really doing it. I think it was maybe when I first heard it, it was sort of like, oh, there'll be this progression, but it's happening really,
really fast,
and really dramatically, and really, it's more connected than I thought, especially this year when we've got, you're talking about 100 days of tents being set up, and then the culmination of it is going to be a Send gathering in Kansas City at the end of the 100 days in October, and literally to send people, out into the nations, including America, into mission. And so it's amazing. God's doing it. It's amazing.
Yeah. 2020 is going to be a remarkable year. I mean, we know of about 20 stadium type of gatherings going on in 2020, which is just a shocking number. I mean, I actually was just talking to Mike Bickle from IHOP just the other day, and he was saying, in all his years, he's never seen anything like this. And people that have been around the block a few times are saying, my goodness, like this is something is really going on. It's not just a hype, there's a sense of real God stories and God's hand being on a lot of these key moments, I think it is the Lord. And, again, the event culture comes with issues. We don't want to be about the next event. They're catalytic, they're helpful, but it's the lifestyle, it's the discipleship. And that's why I'm excited about Presence Pioneers and all these things, just to be able to link arms and really walk this out in a tangible way, in a long-term way. So.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Talk about unity. Talk about John 17, because I know that's a burning desire in your heart. That's part of what's happening through Awaken the Dawn, is, as you would say, people are finding one another through these tent initiatives and gatherings that are happening. Talk a little bit about unity, because I think that's one of the things that God's used Awaken the Dawn for in a powerful way. Talk about God's heart for that.
Yeah, I just really think that the Lord wants to do something, I believe, in answer to Jesus' prayer in John 17:21. He said, that we would be one the way that the Father and the Son are one, which is the most audacious thing, as many people know. And yet, the big question everybody asks is, how do you get there? Right? I mean, like, there's been so many efforts. You get groups together, you all try to work through your differences, and you have a great moment, and then you walk away, and it doesn't seem like major change comes. So I don't have like the total answer, but I do think this one thing. I think that gathering around the presence of God is critical if we're going to have actual unity. It's almost as if the unity and the interconnectedness that we desire comes as an overflow of this value for hosting the presence of God. Now, obviously, it takes work on our relationships, and you can't go to a prayer meeting and say, I don't have to talk to that guy down there. I mean, obviously, that's not going to work. We got to be talking, we got to be dialoguing, we got to be actually spending time. So that's kind of the other point here, is that it takes real effort relationally. But I think that the unity movements, when they're centered on ourselves And when we're just staring at one another, I think we only get so far. I think it's actually when we're unified in our shared desire for Jesus and for his mission, that I think the unity comes to the next level, which I think is partly why God, has orchestrated a family out of some of what's transpired over the past 3 years with ATD. When we went to the mall, it was 1,700 worship teams, about 50,000 people, and it was worship. It was day and night, 24/7. But the biggest takeaway for a lot of people was that they discovered one another, that there was such a sense of family and community, relationships that have lasted for years. California, for example, they brought I think it was 30 groups came from California, and they ran the California tent. They went back and they started something with, I think it was about 200 to 250 different worshiping groups, worship teams that started meeting on a regular basis, building an authentic love for one another, partnership, collaboration, friendship. And so what it started with was this joint environment of encounter with Jesus that was a little more than a conference, in the sense that everybody was participating. We were doing it together. Everybody was in the saddle. Something about that that is a game changer, I think. Again, I don't presume to have all the answers on seeing John 17:21 fully manifest, but I think there's an element of this that it requires us not simply staring at one another. It's like,
Yes.
what came first, the outpouring on the day of Pentecost or the unity at the end of Acts chapter 2? Well, yeah, it was both, but clearly it was when the Holy Spirit was poured out on that Jerusalem church that you get the end of Acts 2 and into Acts chapter 4, where by the time you get to Acts 4, they're sharing everything. They're just, everything's in common. But that wasn't just because they were, really smart or had worked really hard on conflict resolution, which I'm sure they did. But really the marked difference was they were living in an open heaven. They were living in this reality of the presence of God dwelling in their city. And that love of the Trinity was so imparted into their community. That's the source, right? And so that's why I'm saying, if we want unity in our cities, why not come out of our environments, step towards one another, build the dialogue, but also put the presence and worth of Jesus and the Great Commission right in the middle of the narrative. Let that be the centerpiece of the unity movement. And then I think that'll take everything to the next level. So
Yes. No, I totally agree. Unity around worship, prayer, the gospel, those things, so that Jesus is the center and we're not the center. Amazing. Awesome. Well, thanks, David. Anything else you want to share related to Awaken the Dawn or anything?
No, man, I think I'm just so excited to partner with you and just to see. I think the next couple of years are going to be remarkable in our nation. So we're deeply encouraged, and I think the big takeaway for me, biggest desire I think in all this, is that God would really lay his hands on communities, just like what you experienced, Matthew, what I experienced. I just believe there's a whole new generation. Gen Z is somewhat actually very much in crisis right now. And I just recently read an article from that hasn't been published yet, but it's about to come out, from George Otis Jr., called Revival in the Next Generation. It's this white paper he spent years working on. And basically, it's a study of Gen Z, and then a response to the current condition of this next generation in America. And there's a lot of conclusions in there, a lot of data that is absolutely alarming. I'll say it that way. Pretty alarming. For example, one of the data points in there was that only 48% of Gen Z in America identify themselves as heterosexual, which means 52% do not. Now that's not a bash against the LGBTQ community. I believe some of the greatest revivalists are going to come out of that community. I think it's, the Lord loves them, but nonetheless, it just gives you a sense of the pulse of what's happening. And at the end of the day, what's needed right now is more than moralism. Moralism is not enough. Politics are not enough. I believe in engaging politics, but at the end of the day, we have to have the manifestation of God's presence in our cities and campuses. There is no plan B for that. There is no plan B. And so that's what I feel is the key in all this. It's not just do the next gathering. I pray that people will, just like what happened in our little journey, what happened in your journey, just get this sense of this is God's way and anybody can do it. If you'll step into that storyline, get a community that begins to engage with the Lord in musical, prayer, worship, creativity together, however often or frequent you can do it reasonably, whatever that looks like. If you will do it, you will get in the storyline and you'll be part of the greatest transformational movement that I believe this nation has ever seen is coming. And I believe it's going to produce a missions movement in the nations, and it's for real. It's not just hype. And so that's the desire of my heart. It's like all these events, stadiums, all amazing, but I'm praying, God, would you produce thousands of communities on campuses and cities that would go, we're going to live this way. We're going to gather our friends. We're going to do it for a decade. We're not doing it for 10 weeks. We're doing it for 10 years. And one way or another, I'm in. I'm going to live this lifestyle. And I think if 1 million people in America go, we're signing up for that, this nation will see the most historic outpouring we've ever seen. And that is really in God's heart. And it's going to touch the unreached people groups of the earth. And it's going to really, truly culminate in Jesus standing on the earth, his actual return. That's where we're going. That's the desire of my heart, man. And I'm praying that God will just release that Psalm 69 zeal for your house. Let it consume a whole generation that's narcissistic. Let them get a vision that they can see Jesus walk their campus, as they begin to relate to him this way for real. And then anything becomes possible, when Jesus is there with his presence and glory. So there it is. That's my heart.
That's amazing. That's a great, let's end on that note. That's amazing. Thanks so much, David.
Yeah, man.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with your friends or on social media. That would be great. And of course, subscribe. You can stay connected with us at presencepioneers.org. Thanks again. God bless.